Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Josh, my friend, I've been off for a good few days. It feels like I've been off for quite a long time, for like a month or something, but nothing changes. EA are still EAing, and turns out they're being sued again over, you guessed it, if there was a bingo card for all sorts of things that EA could be sued for, the number one thing, I think you played bingo with number ones, is very much loot boxes. Yeah. And so this comes from two people in Canada who are regular sort of fans, regular customers of EA. They cite themselves as big fans of the NHL games and the Madden games, but they're suing EA over, it says that the action is being brought against EA on behalf of everyone who purchased loot boxes in any of EA's games since 2008. That phrasing is from GameSpot. They wrote it up. It was initially found by the Patch Notes, which are a law blog, but basically they are taking the task to EA because they want to make it so that Canada's criminal code reflects that loot boxes are gambling, because Canada doesn't have a stance on this. And so GameSpot, cited some other things, like obviously things were changed in Belgium. Belgium ruled that loot boxes are illegal, and same in the Netherlands. We have everything ongoing in the UK. They didn't really seem to, the Gambling Commission for our side of things didn't reach a conclusion yet, or hasn't reached a conclusion yet, but France have said that they're not gambling. So going forward, it seems like it is dividing per country. I know that China made it so that they're not necessarily gambling, but they did make sure that everyone discloses drop rates. So it's kind of like every game has to disclose drop rates. So it's kind of like per country. What do you think, other than it's like the 20th time we've had this conversation?
Well, that's it. It is like the 20th time we've had this conversation. And I think that's kind of telling, Scott, because, all of these lawsuits or whatever, no matter whether they're valid or not, they will add up. And the more people report on them, the more loot boxes maintain their position in the public eye, the more people push back against them, the more EA can't ignore the issue or the feature or whatever. But that said, like all of these lawsuits, all of these times the commissions come and debate whether or not they're going to introduce legislation or regulation or laws or whatever, that takes so much time. That takes so much time. It could take years for any of these lawsuits to be resolved and for there to be any kind of substantial, changes from EA's part or, the governing body's part or whatever. And I think until something substantial like that happens, I don't know if we'll see any kind of, fundamental change from the publisher's perspective, because they still make too much money, man. They still make so much money every single year from the sports games, from the loot boxes in the sports games. So it's going to be a thing that they kind of fight, tooth and nail to maintain and to keep until they physically can't do it anymore.
Do you think that at this stage they'll just keep weathering the storm? It's just sort of enough people, especially in the younger generation, who don't know any different, who have come up and the first game that they played maybe had microtransactions, or maybe had loot boxes, that they're just going to weather the storm. They're just we make too much money, you can't force us unless it specifically goes to the the government side of things per country, and they're literally just going to sort of weather the storm, because it is mentioned here that it is a class action lawsuit which doesn't directly invoke the government. It's more that if they won, it would put pressure on that particular government. In this case, Canada's government, to maybe tackle it, because Canada themselves don't have a governmental opinion on loot boxes. But even if this is a success, it's still not necessarily going to go that big. It's just that hopefully it would generate enough attention around the topic that it could get that big. But it does seem like loot boxes just are this thing that we've sort of dealt with for so long in this generation. Everybody knows what they are if you play games, and it's that weird thing where to some people that is completely accepted, especially if you're younger. Whereas for us, anyone who remembers paying a price for a game and getting a full game, they continue to they always feel bolted on, or they're always sort of trying to make you pay extra for something that is optional in the first place. I don't know, I don't like the reality where we just have to accept them. I do think there's a way to do it more respectfully towards the consumer, but I don't think that's what they're going for. EA are very much just surprise mechanics, and we'll just sort of put the shields up and wait for the rocks to stop hitting us for a bit.
Well, I think that's it, man, because in a way, we kind of did win when it came to loot boxes. We had the big pushback around 2017 with all of those high-profile games like Battlefront, Middle-earth and stuff like that. And then since then, we have seen games, increasingly shy away from calling anything a loot box. For even when they announced that loot boxes aren't going to be in their games, it's treated as some kind of oh, thank you so much for doing this, publishers. And they use it now as a kind of easy win. Obviously, there are some big holdouts, and EA is one of them with their sports franchises that have tried to cling onto it. So it's kind of in this weird space where for the hardcore gamers or whatever, they kind of won their loot box fight. They were removed or significantly altered in games like Star Wars Battlefront or games going forward, live service titles and stuff. But for the games where it has been embedded for much longer, Ultimate Team in FIFA's been around since, I think it was one of the Euro games, like way back
UEFA,
in late
2008.
Was it really? Yeah. I remember playing that, and that was before they had microtransactions attached to it. But that system has been there, and then eventually they added the outside purchases on top of it. But there's such an integral part of that game, and such an integral part of those franchises' profitability, their money-making abilities. You know what I mean? That I think they will just put up the shields. Be this kind of, don't comment on the lawsuits, just let them happen in the background, settle them out of court or whatever happens, and then just kind of like continue to push forward, because no matter how high profile these class action lawsuits may become, they're going to be kind of like a drop in the bucket compared to how much money they're actually bringing in, because they can fight this. They've got like the resources to fight it for as long as possible or whatever. And it is kind of like, it sucks that it's that cynical, and that's how it's probably going to go, but I just think that is how it will go.
I do think that it's valid that if you have a team, a set of developers, working on something over time, in regards to in between releases, you don't have those individual unit costs coming in as much as you do around the launch period. Obviously, something like a GTA, GTA Online, that unit cost is still there. People are still getting invested. It's still in the top charts. And in regards to FIFA and stuff, people are still buying that game. But for the most part, it's not going to replicate the amount of sales that were there at launch, assumedly anyway. And so, I can see the argument for we need a way to pay the devs over time. We need a way to have a recurrent spending model, etc. But I think it's all, for me, it's all in the drop rates. It's all in how fair it is. It's all in how much do you need to literally just keep rolling the dice to get the one thing you want. And could that be solved by getting more specific with it, sort of implementing a thing where you know exactly what you're buying. Because I recently played Crash Team Racing when I was off, and I finally went back to that game after a certain live stream between me and Jules. It is pretty good. And that game does the same thing that Fall Guys does, where it suggests items to buy on a rolling timer. So you're always sort of, you can sort of buy like a pack of stuff, but you're always waiting for something else to be served up. And things like that, they're always kind of playing into that idea of, it is almost like a gambling-based mentality of like, well, if I just wait, I can, or if I get this now, I only have like 10 minutes to buy this thing, so I best put my money down now. And there's a lot of they're all in the same topic of almost, predatory adjacent mechanics that force you into a mentality of, I best buy this thing now, as opposed to just straight up clarity, straight up fairness, just straight up specificity as to where your money is going. For me, that would be the way to quote unquote solve it, would just be get rid of this weird nefarious mentality on the dev side. Sorry, on the most of the time it's the publisher side, trying to get as much money out of you as possible by almost deceiving you at every possible turn.
Totally, man. Like, the issue, it's almost become like, not a straw man issue, but when we talk about, the definitions of whether or not it is gambling, that's what the publishers very much lean on. But the problems are much deeper than that. It's not just about whether or not it technically is gambling or not. It's the fact that these systems are very clearly designed to be at least gambling-esque enough to prey on kind of like, problem gambling, like addiction and stuff. They tap into the same...
It's all psychological.
They tap into the same psychological systems as that, which very much leads people to, like you said, wanting to spin that loot box, wanting to buy into it much more. And, like you said earlier, I'm very much for, the devs, being paid. I mean, you could argue that most of the money from the microtransactions only goes to the people at the very top of the publishers, but let's just say for argument's sake that, I of course want these studios to get paid for what they do. There is so many more ethical ways to go about it, like purely anecdotal, but it's funny that this topic should come up now, because literally yesterday, without diving too much into my own family thing, but my dad phoned me, right? And he was talking, we were just catching up, and he was talking about how someone in my family was spending most of their wage on like FIFA coins, like just buying into every single couple of weeks whenever they got paid and stuff.
God.
And it's because my family, have like their relationship with gambling and stuff. And it's sort of like, it's funny how that kind of like is transferable between a video game and real life gambling, you know what I mean? Because it preys on the same kind of behaviors and stuff. And like when he was talking about it, I was like, that's mad. My dad, who knows nothing about games, barely knows what FIFA is, like is talking to me about this like potential real issue, you know what I mean? That could manifest as it goes on and stuff. So sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, it's always like degrees of separation. Like when something is that close, like you're suddenly super aware that, like you said, someone that is so close to your proximity is being directly involved in getting carried away with these systems. And that's entirely what they're designed for. But it's like that could lead in a horribly disastrous direction that the company is never really going to take any true responsibility for.
Yeah, totally. Because it's like, at their point, they're legally outside of it. You know what I mean? They have enough space where they're like, well, these systems directly didn't cause that. There are so many other factors to get in and get into and stuff. But like, they must have an effect. Like, they must have some kind of knock-on effect or contribute it to some form. I mean, like, there have been a few studies that kind of, linked. I think it was one in the UK that did link it to problem gambling into some form. You know what I mean? So it's why it might not be a direct correlation or a direct causation between one thing and another, but it's certainly part of the ecosystem that contributes to these kind of behaviors and stuff, which is fascinating. And I think we do need some more research into it. And this, at this point, has nothing to do with the actual lawsuit, but I suppose they're kind of linked in that, in terms of, just finding out more about it, pushing back against it to a certain degree, and figuring out the individual kind of response to these systems. You know what I mean? All of these lawsuits are done by individuals who have been playing these games on the behalf of like the fans or whatever. So it's always fascinating to see it from the perspective of someone who actually plays these games, because admittedly, I don't. I'm on the outside. I just have people around me who do play them.
I think when it comes from someone like this, for me, it's more valid because you've played these games over time. You've seen how they've become more nefarious, more predatory. Like, it's spiked multiple times in regards to FIFA. Like, there's been so many, especially online social media campaigns, trying to draw awareness to just how sort of money grubby this stuff's become. And it takes spotlights like this to be shone in that direction to get these conversations out there and hopefully get a bit of momentum around, like being able to put pressure on governments to, at least address this stuff. Because like we see in so many instances, a lot of the sort of governmental bodies just aren't familiar with the tech side of things enough to have an actual frank conversation on the reality of the way things are implemented. My mind just goes to the Mark Zuckerberg Facebook trial stuff in regards to how terribly something can go. But still, I mean, props to these guys for at least sort of getting stuff on the table and trying to have a conversation in their, in a country where it clearly isn't, a big topic in regards to how the government think of it at the minute. And I guess we'll just see how it goes. But let us know what you think down in the comments below. Are there any worthwhile pros to loot boxes that balance out the cons? For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
And we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.